Hey, I don't know how many of you will be interested in this, but I thought a little VFX retrospective of the shots I did for Dynamo Dream could be kind of interesting. There's a lot of shots I did because I've been working on it since like 2018, and so the shots I did in like 2019, redid in 2020, and then redid again in 2021 because I'd look at them and I'd be like, I know how to make this better. Especially towards the end, I was looking at shots and I was like, if I think I can actually improve it in like half an hour, I would give myself that half hour and I jump in to fix it. Because I tried to put limits on that because I could obviously just keep going back into old shots and updating them forever. But I'm really glad I did. But yeah, so let's dive into it. This was gonna be the old first shot of the episode, and it was just the people fighting the giant land crab on the truck. I liked it because it was a weird kind of world thing to start on, but I just couldn't really get it to look. I wanted it to be kind of a good shot from like a visual effects standpoint too, perspective standpoint. And it just didn't feel particularly tactile. I tried adding leaves. I added all of this rain down here. Actually, the rain was it's just a me. I hate my brain. I'm gonna keep pushing through. I keep restarting things. I'm just gonna push through and assume that my brain will kind of catch up to my words at some point. I modeled a couple raindrops and I set them up with a particle system where they would emit just for 2 frames with an upwards velocity. So they appear and they have a little bit of motion blur there, but I don't know. It's not a great answer to rain. But yeah, it just didn't look all that good. I was also one of the things I've stopped doing in the past year. I would always use the mist pass, the depth pass, and mix in different solid colors to kind of define the haze so that you really get this silhouette here and you get the silhouette of the crab on the truck, but you also get the silhouettes of these people here and this grass in the foreground. And I was very much trying to sculpt the composition with the haze, which means that during stills, like, you can definitely read what's going on, but it also means I think I was sacrificing a lot of realism, and so I really started pulling back on that. And the realism went up, but it also means some of the shots don't work as good when you just hit pause, because without the camera moving for the parallax to kind of show where everything is relative to each other, it can kind of get a little bit muddy, but I think that's kind of just what real life is like. But anyways, yeah, I tried a second version of this shot, and it's even worse! Look at this! I was trying to throw everything I had at this, and it all just equaled nothing. I was trying to make it feel tactile with these rocks here. I was like, what if we kind of have some early dawn light coming out? When it's raining, but you can see like a sliver of lit horizon in the background. And it all just blended together to be a big mess. And I guess compositionally, I don't really know what's going on here. It's kind of there's just a band of junk, and then it's obviously just ended up going with the truck, or with the shot on the TV in the diner. And direct sunlight outdoors, that's always very easy. That'll always look really good. You can just load in an HDRI and let that do all of the lifting. So yeah, this is a forgotten shot. And this is the next shot, which I think I actually kind of messed up on. I liked this design for the window and all of this, but it almost feels a little bit too fantastical. Here, I'll show you the previous version. See, it was just very dark and moody, and this just kind of feels like a budget bunk room. If you didn't have a lot of money, you just needed a place to sleep. This feels a lot more real, and I think this, as a starting point for Joe's character, I think this would have made a lot more sense. But the other one just kind of had, it's the first few seconds of the episode, and I did kind of want to make that initial promise. So the opening bit with the crab, which ended up being, the room, the weird infinite room with the log, was just kind of like a, hey, stuff can get kind of weird, like, promise. And I wanted to continue that, I guess, a little bit in the next shot, but I still am kind of kicking myself I didn't just refine this vibe a little bit more. This shot's very, very representative of what a lot of the first pass looked like, where one of the big things that's changed in the past few years is just I started off with a GTX 1080, then I got a GTX 2080, and now I've got a 3090, which means my rendering capabilities have just exploded. So this used to be what I could render. I'd render a still image, I'd render a depth map and kind of displace it to look as if maybe the camera's moving. I'd add flares and rain and steam to kind of make it feel alive, and then I'd add some camera shake over the top of it. But it does mean that everything just kind of felt like animated stills, because they were. And we'll see more of that later. This was the first version of this shot, and it's nice, but it's doing the haze thing. I have haze everywhere, and it felt very copy and pasty, and I wanted this to kind of be the introduction to the city. And so a year later, I did like that there was kind of bits of grass and stuff kind of out here, but again, you never look at this and think that's something that could be photographed. It does look very, renderish. I was also adding lots of like flares and things. I was like, where's that flare coming from? These beacons? No. So I did another version with, again, a lot more textured ground, just keeping things. I added a lot more details. I wanted to make sure there was little stuff you could look at. All of these people are actually animated. I got really into adding room interiors, but it still didn't feel particularly real at all, and I really wanted to capture this early morning gloom, and so just recently, a couple months ago, I did a final version of the shot. Totally new opening 2. So yeah, the final grade was a lot more contrasted, but yeah, you can see I really leaned into the diffusion. You can see in the background, it's all just silhouettes with like a little bit of light leaking in. I wanted it to feel as if the rain was actually blending the values the further back you got, which means actually all I did was in the composite, I blurred everything and I used the mist depth pass to power the visibility of that blur, which is a very easy way, if it's kind of hackish, to get this sort of look. Caitlin, actually a lot of people like the first versions of shots I do a lot more, because that's when I'm usually like, and big colorful clouds and big directional sunlight, and it's kind of my initial sketch, but that means a lot of times it's a little bit bolder and a little bit more colorful, and by the time I finally refined everything to look yeah, they just don't like it as much. I'm like, yeah, that's fair. I'm like, am I trying to make each shot as pretty as I can, or am I trying to make it so that it works the best in the episode? And in this case, I do think that this works better in the episode. This is another shot I thought worked okay, but a lot of people said they didn't like the character animation, so Dan Fox actually did another pass of this, which made it look a lot better. Here, let's jump over. Unfortunately, this is the first photo scan of a person I ever did, and I never updated it, so this is like the worst photo scan I've ever done. But yeah, I love Dan's animation, and I went through and I added a bunch of moss and plants because that was a phase a few months ago, and just rendered it with more samples because I could, to keep from getting all those little glimmers everywhere. This shot is fairly representative of the iterative approach I started taking towards the end, and just like my quality bar going up over time. So this was the original shot where Caitlin was just walking over these stools, and I figured I'd replace these to be chimneys or something like that, which I don't know actually why I didn't end up going with that. But yeah, the first version of this was, and yeah, this is low contrast log footage, but this was my first composite where I basically kept everything. I added in this little bit of building right here. This was during my wire clump phase, where I had this one wire object, and I just stuck it absolutely everywhere. I wasn't doing any design or anything. I was just like, wires, 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 wires. You can see these aren't actually like 3D models. These are just 2D things that are sliding around, which, like, especially for this wire right here, it's just moving all static. I never actually updated that, but it did drive me nuts that like this was supposed to be an introduction to the city, and instead it's just like a couple flats. So this was my roto brush test. Adobe updated their auto roto brush tools, and so this actually rotoed pretty easily. And I made a whole video about the making of this background, but I liked it. Just kind of like, you can look at her, but also you can look into the background. But after watching this for a bunch of times, I was still annoyed at these guys. So I didn't actually have the file. I lost the file for these, and for some reason I didn't feel like making it again. So I just made a new file that lined up with these little boxes here on the front, and I just replaced the wires. And there's just certain things that I know they'd bug me forever. If I released the episode, I'd be like, oh, I should have taken just the half hour to fix that. And so this is just some random assets from, like, I think the antenna asset file stuck on there. This is just a row of vertices with a cloth sim on it pinned to either side, and it worked really good. I want to do more stuff with that, because it's such an easy way to add cables. Thank you, Plunder Secrets. The early version had a lot of stuff like this, where I just had the same handful of assets, and I was using it over and over and over again, which was interesting. But one of the things I really started doing by the end was, like, I always want to have something that's distinctive in the shot. Like, I can't make an entire shot out of greebles, and so for this one I was very excited. Susie Spooner made this very wonderful Dr. Lemurs poster, which I hadn't realized actually until seeing this. I forgot to put that somewhere else. It's such a cool poster of Dr. Lemurs, and that's okay. I have other places I can put it. But yeah, over time, eventually, this shot wasn't saying much. It was just some nice pipes, I guess. Although I do like how metallic they looked because the highlights are all hot like that. I made that a whole video about the making of this shot and going through all the different versions. I think I still have all of them saved to my computer here. And yeah, here's the final, just kind of going through it iteratively. What I like, and that's what the entire video is about, but I start with something just really rough. It's really intimidating to try to make an entire shot like this, so I just try to get something I can look at as quickly as possible, so then it turns into a process of fixing the bits I don't like, instead of like feeling as if I have to make this entire thing, because it's easy to like, one of the last things I did was actually update this building. I just wanted there to be a more thought out building. Like, it's still really quick, but it was just made out of like random greebles before, and I was like, let's actually model something that fits the scene a little bit better. So it's kind of just steps like that where you can just keep refining and refining forever until you realize I'm never gonna finish my movie. This was the first version of this shot where the ship takes off from this other ship, kind of the flying car deal. And a lot of this was motivated by the fact that I didn't really want to spend a lot of time modeling a flying car. And so I always kept it really, really small, but that means in the initial screenings, people were never noticing this. I thought it was really obvious. It's the only thing moving in the entire shot, and it's even way too big. That's supposed to be like car-sized, but it's like huge compared to this ship. But people wouldn't see it, and so finally I redid it as is this shot with all of this stuff going on, which is good because narratively it does establish like, hey, look at this, pay attention to what's going on, because it's a relevant plot thing. This was one of the first scenes that I did, and I threw out or redid a lot of these shots. Like this right here, it felt very, very messy to me, and also you can see obviously like my camera move is just incredibly shaky, and I didn't really like that. I was leaning, I was like, we'll have the dust, we'll have the steam, but I didn't even match like the color balance of her. She has no skin tones, which was mostly because I filmed the entire thing with the wrong white balance in the camera, and I was having trouble grading it to fix. But yeah, there's all these keying artifacts here, so I had this shot in the edit for a long time. In fact, I think I updated it. Oh no, this is just another this is just another angle of it. Yeah, I guess this is an updated version, but it doesn't even really look better, and so I just nixed this shot. Oh yeah, this was the other version of this shot, just where I was like, we can't see that car too close, which I kind of like, honestly. Like, I like the idea that the car is in the distance. We're not getting this, big, obvious close-up of it. It's kind of more like a background environmental thing that's just kind of passively happening, as opposed to this big close-up shot where it's like, look at this CG vehicle flying into the clouds. I would have liked it if I could have maybe split the difference a little bit, but at least this way people knew that this was an important thing to have paid attention to. A lot of updates like this, where this was the version I had for a couple of years, and I finally went, okay, well, I'll re-render it with water, and I'll add a little bus. Just anywhere I could make something kind of happening half on screen or in the distance that added some life to it, I started going for it, because you only really need like one of those per shot to make everything feel really dense. And so this was all kind of like copied and pasted together. Like, I think this is the wallpaper outside of the building, which is a little bit weird. So yeah, so here's the final version, and it's basically the same. Although, look at this. That is, I believe, the only magenta of a missing material in the entire episode. Also, yes, you can see a tracking point right here that I didn't get rid of, and some tape where I was holding the green screen together. That's there in the final. I knew about it. I just didn't want to roto anything. Sometimes I'd try to set up a shot right before I went to bed, just because I was like, oh, I'll wake up in the morning and maybe there'll be a cool shot. And so this was one of those. This is actually just a wide version of that one, of that other shot, just rendered from back here. But looking at it, like, all of the steam looks way too bright and uniform, and this cement wall just looks very, JPEG-ish. This guy's floating. I mean, that's fine. But yeah, so I get to look at this and think, okay, what would this actually be like if it were an actual location? Like, there's some sort of canal thing down below her. Maybe there's some sort of drain down here. I want to retexture the wall. So this is what I ended up with later, and I'm glad I took the time to do that and add the pipes and kind of just adding. I actually worked out this whole thing. Like, there's little bridges and fishing areas and stuff down here in this pond, but you can't really see any of them at all. This was the first version of this shot that I did, back before I actually knew, what the ships and stuff out here were going to look like. I had so much trouble with here. I'm doing all of this fake lighting on her to try to match the sun angle. You can see there's a little sun hit on her butt that's just kind of like wiggling around. And she looked just very stationary, so I'm adding all of this like elbow movement and like this leg kick. That's all kind of just an awkward digital thing I added on there. But because I did add in that big, wide, broad shot, this building suddenly didn't make any sense spatially. Like, we already got a pretty good layout of where everything was, and so I actually had the entire episode uploaded, and that was driving me crazy, and so I just did I set up one extra night, and I redid this shot so that it actually has the proper background going on there. There's a few things, actually, about this, like, I only rendered every, like, 5th frame, and I interpolated them, which means you can see some glitches here that drive me crazy, anywhere where there's, like, really tiny details. This fence is glimmering like crazy, and the parallax here of the background in this wall doesn't make any sense at all. Also, her legs are kind of all getting weird. There was a lot about this shot, and the color space of this building that just didn't work, but that was where I was like, people will be looking here, then they'll be looking here, and there's some birds, and it's a quick shot. I'm not going to delay things one more day just to fix that. Eventually, it just becomes kind of an ego thing. And like, I want everything to be perfect. It's like, you don't need everything to be perfect. Same with this shot. This was, again, like my first pass of the city where like pipes are just intersecting, and I took these kind of like these dirty plaster things and stuck them absolutely everywhere. Everything's just the same, like 4 buildings over and over and over. So yeah, this is the final version of this. Again, the sample rate I was trying to render, it was like 3 a.m. and I just wanted to start the export before I went to sleep, and so I rendered it with not quite enough samples. The denoising did really good, but there's still some in the highlights, some glimmer there, which I'm okay with that. This is another really good example. Like, this is the version I had, I think, for a couple years, and I did my usual thing with like the little particles bouncing around, and I had the smoke and all of that, but I did another pass where I added one of Susie Spooner's murals back here. I added the pigeons, and I also just modeled a couple feathers and turned it into a particle system that I was able to stick on the nest and on, you know, just random surfaces, so they would just have all that little dander and stuff sticking in there, which I think added quite a bit of realism. Yeah, this one's, I guess, a little bit obvious, but oh, and I added like a bedroom. It was just kind of, I reached the point where it's like, look, if it's not going to take you longer than a couple minutes, just do it. And so I'm adding in bedrooms and adding in pigeons, and it's nice. I also started to realize if I just bite the bullet and like make an asset well, like, so some of these antennas and things are stuff that I just sat down and I took a day and I modeled a bunch of antennas, and that means now I just have this repository so I can just go through old shots where I would have been modeling each antenna from scratch and cutting a lot of corners. I can drop in a proper antenna, and I feel a lot better about that. In fact, one thing that I do now in my workflow is when I'm thinking about the entire project, I do, at the start, think about what objects will I be using a bunch, and systematically try to, like, just give myself time to make those assets at the beginning, which I think is already probably default for a lot of people's workflow. I mean, it's really obvious, but I usually just, like, jump into each individual shot, and sometimes I don't step back and look at the bigger picture and figure out ways to optimize, so that's a thing I'm trying to learn. Okay, the market scene. This is another shot where I just rendered a still and displaced it with a displacement map. And actually, this is the second version, because the first version didn't have this bus. I was trying to distract from the fact that these are just a bunch of architectural previs people all standing there stationary. And my friend Chris and his kids came over and we filmed some green screen elements. And I was like, maybe if I add them in enough into the scene, it'll look alive and you won't notice, like, this frozen woman at the base of the steps. But it just, I don't know, I was never really pleased with it. Like, it never felt like it was an introduction to, like, a vibrant place. So basically, I started to hate this technique, the whole displacement of the still render, because I could always kind of see it just for what it was. It's really efficient in terms of, like, adding some life to a still render. But yeah, 2 years later, I made this version, where I just added in a bunch of, these are the photo scans I did with the drone in my backyard, where basically, like, me, Caitlin, and Sean were dressed up in outfits, and the drone would orbit around us, and I was able to turn that into, like, a sloppy photo scan, and we just did it for a bunch of different outfits. So I had all these people, but none of them are animated except for, like, a couple little people sliding through there, and it was very weird. I did a test where that I made a video about where I animated all of them just with a couple shape keys to kind of make it look like they're walking. Just the legs were going like this, and maybe their shoulders were kind of bouncing a little. And I fed that into a Boyd's particle system. Again, I uploaded a bunch of videos about this, and I slapped that into this shot. And suddenly it felt like, whoa, look at this. Everybody's walking around everywhere. It felt a lot more lively. If you look at any of these individual people, a lot of times they're doing some really funky stuff. But I think actually I have the speed way too high. If I slowed this down like half, it probably would have read a little more realistic. But I still like it. This is the first version I had of this shot, and again, you can just see, like, I didn't want to spend more than a couple minutes on anything. This is a plane with a couple edge loops, and then just insetted and extruded, and I was like, that's what windows look like. And I replaced this like a couple days before I released the episode just to kind of make it feel... Honestly, I don't like this camera move. This is a very CG-ish camera move, and if I'd kept it a lot more subtle, I think it would have worked a lot better. I don't know actually why I did that. What's funny is when I did this shot, I was more excited about this shot than almost any shot I'd ever done. But eventually, again, after looking at it for a year, this whole background started to just feel very drag and drop random assets. It's like, why would a market look like this? This just kind of looks like piles of junk and random takeout boxes and inordinately large beer bottles and stuff. And like this tray back here, it looks like it's like bigger than her. It looks like it's like 7 feet tall. So I redid that. It's always easier to look at something and think, how would I fix this, as opposed to trying to make it from scratch. And so if you can bring both of those into the process, where the first time you're like, all right, I'm making something from scratch, and then you come back later and you go, okay, what could I do, now that I have another afternoon to make this better, that makes it a lot less daunting than just trying to feel as if you have to, like, make something on the first pass. A lot of times I'll do initial renders like this. Like, this is just an Eevee export, just to see how everything works in the edit, and also just to see like these animated lights from the actual video. I realized I needed to put in a fake light source in here to cast light on the rest of the digital environment, and you just find out a lot. I realized I didn't like the motion of this. I think the camera motion or something. I blended from the digital camera motion into the actual camera motion the closer I got. And you can see that, like, as that started to happen, this would glitch out. So I had to smooth out everything a little bit. Just, you learn a lot. This was the original version of this shot, except everybody was looking for Miss Sylvan up here instead of right here. I added a light. I had it, like, flicker a little bit. I thought, oh, I guess, is it flickering? But nobody saw her, and so I just made a new version. But yeah, this is a full 3D render, although you can't tell. It still looks 2D, but... there we go. Now she's actually in a window, and even though to me she seems more hidden, I think more people do end up seeing her, just because that's where you'd look for somebody, is in a high contrast window in the middle of the shot. Originally, I had a lot of these photo scan people that I gave a quick armature to and had looking around, kind of like in the first lazy tutorial I did, where I'm just like, people are animated kind of like this, and you go, yeah, I guess that kind of looks like a person, but I would just have a shot where there was a bunch of those people in there. So one of the last passes I did was drop in all of these green screen like cowboy people we made for the missile shot that's later, and I'm glad we did that because they look a lot more realistic. This is also how I get many cameos. I think that's me. That's obviously me, just standing there with these digital people. This is an entire practical set that Nate Taylor and I built. We put a lot of time into it, but I ended up not using it for anything. We built this set, and we made... we had one day where we built like 3 different versions of this same set, and this is the only place that this one appears, and it's just kind of a little background thing. I dig it. This is one of the shots I wish I could redo, because just something about the lighting, again, it felt kind of, I don't want to say video gamey, because that's the worst way of saying it, but it didn't feel tactile. It kind of, I don't know, you could see all of these architectural, people in the background. There was a lot trying to go on, like there's a little bistro down here and people having conversations, but by the end of the process, I knew I could fix this in like an hour and add a lot more life. But this is one of the few project files that I think I accidentally saved over at one point, or got corrupted or something, because I could never find this background again. Yeah, I probably could have added pigeons and things up here. There's a lot I could have done to this shot. Also, the camera move, it's a very digital, orbity camera move. that I probably could have tried to make the camera feel a little bit more situated somewhere. If I added a foreground to this shot, it would have been one of like the best shots in the episode. Like if I'd set it back a little bit and there was a railing and there's people doing stuff and you just see the clock here, you know, looming in the background, like chiming. This is just an asset from Tears of Steel, actually. This is the Oudekerk clock tower from Tears of Steel that I think was modeled by Rob Teudel. This is another wish list shot. Just this elevator looks, it's exactly like what it is. I beveled some stuff, extruded some stuff, and filled it with like random greeble assets that I had. Look, there's that one wire clump, huh? It's just stuck there. And I wish I'd given it a little bit more love. Weird thing about this shot, most of the time I'm rendering at like 200 samples with denoising. This one needed like 2,000. Just, I was getting, everything was jittering. I think it's just because it was enough of an enclosed space, but I thought that was really weird. The floorhead scene, basically, I did a pass of that at the very beginning. It was one of the first things we shot, and I just liked it the entire time. Somehow it just all kind of came together, so I dug it. This background is a matte painting that I replaced at one point. It was just kind of like random pipes, and then I built this more kind of office construction here, which I think makes it a little bit more interesting. But that's the only real change I did. And yeah, here's an early version of this shot. What's nice, because I did have just one project that was the entire background, I just had to update that and like re-render, and everything just updated, which was very nice. Here's version 1 of this. I got my little default dudes back here. This is a photo scan I did of the Corridor Digital crew back when they came over once. I think they could still be there in the final shot. I forgot about that. Quickly replaced this version with this version, but it still just felt very sparse. These tiny little dudes, you know, notwithstanding. When Nate came over and him, me, and Caitlin dressed up as cowboys and stuff, and we got a bunch of this stuff, which ended up being really useful. Honestly, the biggest thing it proved is that if I just recorded a bunch of random people with semi-directional lighting on them, I would use them all the time. And so I want to do another pass where I just get, you know, like 25 people kind of milling about or standing about, because I would just drop those in the scene all the time. I loved being able to actually use them in the actual shot, like in 3D space. Normally I'd composite in After Effects or something, but this whole scene, like, you could just watch it in Eevee like this. Actually, just like a random note, if I did do that, I'd probably make them all in the same video, and so it's not even having to load a bunch of different videos. It's just one video file, and you're just UV mapping the people off of this kind of sampler page, which I think could be the most efficient way to do it. Towards the end, I kind of started figuring out the type of love I could do shots if I did another version on it, which means, and once that idea was in my head, I started to see the current version of the shot as the empty version. Like for this shot, I knew I could add a vehicle here, I could add some moss and kind of just other stuff. This shot is actually just like a couple JPEGs extruded a little bit, and so and once that idea is in my head, it started to drive me crazy. So I did this version, which is honestly basically the same. It's just adding a little bit more, adding little drips, adding the little extra stuff. It only takes like half an hour to add all of this, but I don't know. I'm keep bringing this up because I'm trying to learn the lesson there. I feel like there's this very specific tightrope between fixing things you can, but not fixing things forever, and I don't know what that tightrope is just yet. This is another one of those still renders, but with the depth pass parallax trick going on, which was fine. But I started coming up with this rule where any shot that was made entirely out of like greeble pieces, like these are all background bits. There's nothing here that could be the subject of a shot, and so I started going through and trying to add in those subjects. And so this foreground bit right here, this is just a rehash of that similar building from that big opening shot. But having the camera actually moving for this bit helped to justify the subtle bit of parallax going on in the background for the rest of it. And I don't know, it's one of those things where it invites you to come in and look at the details, but at the same time not too close, because these are obviously just like the same people in kind of the same configuration. So I kind of kicked myself about that a little bit. But yeah, the same thing here. This would all be really cool stuff if it were just in the background, but if you're just supposed to sit and look at it for like 6 seconds, it's like, what am I looking at? Like the market? Yeah, that's kind of just some low poly market models. And so towards the end I created this bit, and so now it's implied the subject is this foreground area where all these people are looking at this big statue, and so everything else is still there, making everything feel nice and rich, but it doesn't feel as if it has to be the subject. Here's the original version of this shot, just kind of to see how it reads in the edit. I'll render out a preview and I'll drop it into the edit just to see how everything flows, especially because the camera's moving and the train is moving and all of that. I wanted to see how all of the shots would interact. And sometimes I have bright lights passing by on Caitlin as she's sitting there, and so I tried to make things kind of blend between shots, and previews were a great way to do that. But yeah, I think this is the original version, and I just had so much haze going on here. Like, you can't even see this back wall. It's a very, very bright shot, and I was trying to do that compositionally just to make it read. You know, here's the center, here's the silhouette of the bridge. You can really read what's going on from like a silhouette perspective, but the realism, I think, was lost a bit. So this was the final, just a lot less haze, and maybe it doesn't look better, but it feels, I don't know. This was the first version of this shot, which it just looked very, we made a apocalyptic, you know, sci-fi movie in our garage and put on all of like the tattered stuff on our heads. And so I did the tutorial talking about turning them into robot dudes, which just kind of feels like a weird world thing. I knew I wanted Nate to have this kind of digital eye, and the idea was that was going to be an artifact from people who used to pilot like the giant robotic like mechs back during the Lobster War, which is why Chris also has one. But this was just looked a little bit too sci-fi, like the glowing eye, and I don't like glowing eyes, so I ended up giving him the milky eye, and I like that a lot better. This was an old version of the big shot, where she was just going to be going up and buying a taco here. I actually like the vibe of this. This feels very much like late dusk, you know, somewhere near the ocean in Los Angeles or something. I don't know. It kind of just has a bit of that vibe. But yeah, this became the Omega shot, which was my folder directory name for the 2-minute shot with the elevator. I have a bunch of previews of this, because again, it's just very iterative, and because I was saving it with Eevee, I would just hit render before I went to bed, and I'd wake up and I'd be able to see what everything looked like, and just start, just trying to get something watchable as quickly as possible. I was at this stage by basically like the end of the second day, and so I was feeling really, really confident. I was like, man, look at this, I put this together so quick, this will be fast. And then I just kept adding tiny details and refining until I ended up taking, you know, like 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks on this shot, and this is where it looked at the end of the second day. So you can see it's very much that issue of diminishing returns, but like there's so many little issues that just took a really long time to figure out how to address. I actually, the episode is cropped to like some weird aspect ratio, cropped off the top and bottom, but I did this shot in full, you know, 1920 by 1080, and this really showed me I liked having this space, especially for environmental type storytelling. I liked having that extra bit on the top and bottom. I like verticality. I like, you know, things going up and down, and you can look up, you can look down. The really widescreen format is great for like, you know, widescreen epic stuff, but I want people to be crammed into tiny little spaces, and which means I want as much space to work with as I can get. And so future episodes are going to be full screen like this. There also used to be a thing, there was just a stigma, you know, I learned doing all of this back in like 2002 or whatever, when you wanted everything really wide because that's what movies looked like, and television was full screen, and so everybody cropped all their stuff. But now, like, this is what, you know, half of the good media we look at, this is there isn't that association with production value and a full screen 16:9 render anymore. This is one of those shots that I was so excited to do when I first hit render, you know, a year or two, I guess a couple of years ago. But now it drives me crazy. Like, this is a train. You can kind of get a sense of how big a person would be. And here's a vending machine. That makes sense. But also, like, these are little vending machines. And these are streetlights. And none of this scale makes any sense. There's no sense that anybody ever goes outside and walks around here. Like, here's an entire, like, 3-story building about the same height as this train. It just started to drive me crazy. And I knew I could add, like, some sort of Coney Island pier or something with, like, a Ferris wheel or whatever. I was like, oh, I could put life all over this place. And so I was going to take a couple more days and redo all of this shot. But I was talking with a friend who was like, Ian, you don't have to make every shot crammed full of stuff. You can have you can have that contrast, and that made a lot of sense to me. The scaling issues still bug me like crazy, and also the render issues. You can see right here is I did a volumetric render, which I didn't really have enough samples. This already took like so long per frame, but yeah, this is probably the shot that I'm least happiest with in the episode, just because I have in my head the shot that it could be, and this is so far from it that it bums me out a little bit. Oh yeah, this was originally when she went in the bathroom. I had this kind of like sicko vision. Whoa, 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 and I couldn't figure out a good way to do it. So fortunately, I didn't end up going with it. And I guess actually I'll end with this. This was my first project I ever did with Blender 2.8, so all of the changed hotkeys were driving me crazy. And it's kind of reminds me that like most of the stuff we filmed for the episode was not originally, like, that episode didn't exist for the longest time. I was trying to make this complete other story, and I ended up just kind of like remixing everything to try to massage it to work. Originally, she was going to come to the wall at the top and look out for the desert, to the desert as she's waiting for the plane that her brother's on to fly in, and that's where, as she's waiting, she was going to see the robot crab battle out there, and they were going to be killing. She and a friend were going to be killing time. None of that ended up being in the final thing, and obviously turned into, she gets on the train and does that whole thing. So what I'm really, really, really trying to do now is just I've been going nuts the past couple weeks trying to dial in the next episode as well as I can, so that one, I don't have to feel as if I didn't do the story as good as I could. The first episode, it is not a great, like, ideally the experience is pleasant and it won't turn anyone, off really, at least not too much, but I really want to nail the storytelling in the second one. I like the fact that the first episode has room to kind of have a vibe and kind of casually just watch people like live a bit, but I don't want to have that be like, that's not mutually exclusive from also having a character with agency actively, trying to do a thing. So I'm trying to find that balance a little bit better. And so, and I also, if I have the entire thing scripted out, that means I can just schedule a bunch of shoots for ideally like a 1 week, 1 month period where we just get everything in the can, so it isn't this thing like with this episode where we'd film something, then 6 months later we do another shoot, 6 months later we do another shoot, and all of the ideas are slowly evolving over time, which again is nice, but it's one of the biggest reasons everything took like 3 years. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm talking with a bunch of friends, brainstorming things. It's been really fun. But yeah, hopefully this was sort of interesting. I don't know. I think I thought I'd learned a bit more than maybe I did. But yeah, I will talk to you soon.